Hello everyone, my name is Adelanda and this is Solarpunking, where we discuss solarpunk ideology, things we can do in our communities to make them better, and ways to build the world that we want to live in. Recently, I saw someone post on Threads that if you go far enough left, you get your guns back. And that's where we are today. I do want to give warning that we will be talking about firearms today and why I think that exercising your right to own a firearm might be a necessary strategy for protecting the society we want to build. So if you're 1,000% against firearm ownership, it won't hurt my feelings if you skip this one. But I hope you'll stick around anyway and hear me out.
You have this history well before the Civil War of organized black self-defense in northern communities where black people are free. In the post-Civil War period, the late 19th and early 20th century, you have state officials who basically are in league with groups like the Ku Klux Klan. I think that situation is mitigated to some extent by the fact that black people in the South, in fact, are armed and are able to defend themselves. So there's a tremendous push in the 1950s and 1960s for black voter registration.
We've got to make sure that they are reached and get into the city to do the voting.
The Ku Klux Klan basically decides, they are going to go after the people who are registering black voters, intimidate them, and kill them. So you have groups beginning to be formed designed to protect the black community and to protect civil rights workers who are registering black voters. The most effective of these, I would argue, was a group called the Deacons for Defense and Justice. The Deacons for Defense and Justice were basically black men who had been veterans of the Second World War or the Korean War. The Panthers were very good at publicity and not particularly good at protecting black communities. The Deacons, on the other hand, just very silently let it be known if you try to harm people in our community or the people working with us, it's not going to go very well for you.
That clip was from The Reawakening of the Black Gun Rights Movement by Reason TV on YouTube. This week I watched a movie called 40 Acres and it kind of gutted me. I'll admit it was inspiration for this topic. I've wrestled with the idea of gun ownership myself for a really long time, and then when I started traveling the country as a federal employee, I realized how important it was to protect myself as a solo female traveler and a black woman. I'm fully aware of sundown towns and areas of this country that don't have a single person of color for miles. And I had to come to the depressing realization that some people are going to wish you harm for reasons that have nothing to do with you, regardless of how good you are or how kind and smart and funny you are. They do not care, and you will not always get the chance to even try to change their mind. 40 Acres was just a movie, but it spoke to something real. Basically, the movie was set in a time where there was an economic collapse in their society, and there was no food industry, so farmland was extremely valuable, and the difference between life or death for people. Now, in the real world, foraging would also be an option for small groups, but I'm not sure why that wasn't a viable option in the movie. I think they were implying that there was also a lot of crop failure, so fertile land made the difference. So, of course, there were groups of people who did not have access to their own farmland, so they resorted to stealing, killing, and even cannibalizing groups that had food resources that they didn't have. And while it was an extreme example, there are plenty of examples of this dynamic in the real world. In fact, there are plenty in history and in the current day where entire communities are slaughtered because they have access to resources that an outgroup wants. And it doesn't really have to happen during times of scarcity. That's where we go back to the idea that sometimes people are just going to wish you harm. Think historic black communities that built their own because they weren't welcome in the larger white society, and the white supremacists destroyed what they built simply because they didn't want them to have it, to keep them subjugated and vulnerable to Jim Crow oppression. Now ask yourself, do you think if we were able to build small socialist adjacent communities that they would be safe from the fascism taking over the country? that they would be allowed to thrive and exist as a counter-argument to fascist authoritarianism, that if they start to provide resources to the people, that people without those resources won't seek to covet them for themselves? If you can answer yes to those questions, I would just ask that you point to a single moment in history where that has been the case. Since the Panthers were mentioned earlier, here's a clip of Henry Louis Gates in Black History in 2 minutes or so, talking about the Black Panthers' use of firearms to protect their community from racist violence.
In October 1966, Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton, a pair of students in Oakland, galvanized by Malcolm X's philosophy of black self-determination, launched the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Their goal was to protect their community from racism and violence, which meant protecting it from the police.
When we first started, we had a police alert patrol, and we would patrol the community. If we saw the police brutalizing anyone, we would put an end to this. Usually the police wouldn't brutalize anyone if we were on hand.
Did the Panthers embrace a willingness to use arms to defend themselves? Absolutely. Unfortunately, that's usually the only part of the story that we get. Even more energy was expended in social programs.
The Panthers put their revolutionary philosophy into practical action. They developed programs targeted at poor black people. They provided the community with free medical care, including sickle cell screening programs, as well as clothing for the needy. Many believe that the Panthers' free breakfast program for school children helped inspire the USDA's federal breakfast program.
We were not for integration, we were for self-determination. We wanted to have the right to determine ourselves what we wanted. Economic opportunity, decent education, access to the full complement of privileges, benefits, and responsibilities of any American.
Not even the FBI was able to stop the spread of the Panthers' ideals, encouraging black people to defend themselves from police brutality and fight for their rights.
So let's think realistically about how we could protect Solarpunk communities. I, probably obviously, don't like the idea of a traditional police force, but I do like the idea of community protection and the way that the Panthers performed it. They weren't there to harass their community members into compliance of some state-sanctioned law. They were there to actually protect and serve the community from people who would seek to do them harm, including racist police officers who regularly antagonize them. They were also armed with knowledge of their rights under California state law and the United States Constitution, and in many situations were able to de-escalate confrontation by asserting their rights. Think about how incredibly useful a squad like that would be right now for protecting community members from ICE raids and bounty hunters who are currently violating the rights of immigrants in different parts of the country. I've also been reading a book called This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, which talks about the ignored history of civil rights activists, including Dr. Martin Luther King, who carried firearms for protection when they were traveling across the country. It also does an amazing job of highlighting how important armed resistance was as a strategy, along with nonviolent resistance. This particularly history being buried isn't a mistake. There is a reason why Martin Luther King is whitewashed and deified, while Malcolm X is villainized, even though they worked closely together to achieve their goals before their murders. But without guns and armed resistance, the civil rights movement would not have been possible. As Stokely Carmichael once wrote, "In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience, and the United States has none." Here's a clip of Kathleen Cleaver, again highlighting why self-defense was so important to the black community during the civil rights era.
Thing I'd like to say about this whole question of violence that's been bandied around, very clear, should be made very clear that in the Black Panther Party and among all black people, it's not a question of violence, aggressive violence. This is what people mostly think of. It's a question of defending ourselves and our people against the violence that's being waged upon us and has been waged upon us for the past 400 years. A war of aggression is going on against black people, not only on the level of guns, but on the level of housing, on the level of education, on the level of food, on every level of the society. There's aggression, there's hostility, suppression, and violence directed against black people. The program of the Black Panther Party originally started as the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. self-defense is to move to defend and protect black people against this violence so that we can move to organize black people into a sufficient power to obtain our needs.
Looking at history, it's clear that communities facing oppression have always had to think seriously about protection. There are plenty of examples that illustrate what happens when people are left defenseless. Armed resistance has always been about survival, de-escalation, and giving communities the breathing room to build something better. That's why responsible self-defense, including firearm ownership, has historically been a necessary piece of a broader survival strategy. If we genuinely want to create solarpunk, socially adjacent, or otherwise liberatory spaces where people can thrive, then we have to be realistic. Solidarity, mutual aid, and nonviolence all matter, but without a plan for defense, history shows how quickly those gains can be taken away. So if we genuinely, truly want to build safe and protected communities, then we also have to be willing to protect them. You may argue that there is a better way, and I can respect that. I'm not saying firearm ownership is the only way. I just believe it should be part of any viable strategy. And as Charles Cobb, the author of the book, says, in order to understand either nonviolence or self-defense, you need to understand both. Anyway, thanks for listening to the 11th episode of Solarpunking. There's only one episode left this summer, and then I'll take a break to decide how to proceed with this podcast. If you have any suggestions or comments, let me know what you think. If you've enjoyed listening in so far, consider sharing this podcast with your friends and family members that you think would also like to join the movement. Also, consider leaving me a comment to let me know what you liked and didn't like, or if you have mutual aid resources you want me to look into. I'm thinking about posting a master list. Also, if you have excess funds, consider donating to the World Central Kitchen. WCK are a team of food first responders mobilizing with the urgency of now to get meals to the people who need them most. Until next week, stay hydrated and motivated. Peace.